Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us. Michelle, over to you.
Thanks, Alyssa. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, Preparing the Federal Workforce for the Future of IT and AI, Strategies for Upskilling and Adaptation. My name is Michelle Anderson. I'm a Vice President here at Leadership Connect, and we're excited to have you join this critical discussion on how federal agencies can equip their workforce with the skills needed to thrive in a technology-driven future. As artificial intelligence and advanced IT systems continue to reshape federal operations, agencies face a pressing challenge. How do we ensure our workforce is prepared for the rapid evolution of technology? Upskilling isn't just about keeping up, it's about staying ahead, fostering innovation, and ensuring that public sector employees have the tools they need to serve effectively. Before we dive in, I have a few housekeeping notes I have to go through. We're currently having a NASBA representative attending to observe the webinar to gain the ability to give out CPE credits. So if CPE credits are something you're interested in obtaining, please listen up. Our learning objectives today are by the end of this session, you'll have a deeper understanding of the biggest challenges federal agencies face in upskilling for AI and IT, real-world success stories and best practices in workforce development, policy, compliance, and ethical considerations for AI training, and the skills federal employees must develop to stay future-ready. This webinar is structured as a panel discussion with industry experts, followed by an interactive Q&A session. If you're here for continuing professional education CPE credits, please note the following. This webinar is up for one CPE in the information technology field of study. There are no prerequisites for this session, and the session is designed for a basic knowledge level. No advanced preparation is required. To receive credit, please ensure you meet the attendance and participation requirements. For this webinar, we will ask 3 polling questions. If you're interested in obtaining a CPE credit, you must answer all 3. This webinar is free to attend. And if you have any concerns or feedback, please refer to our complaint resolution policy found on our website. Leadership Connect is registered with the National Association of State Boards of Accountancy, NASBA, as a sponsor of continuing professional education on the National Registry of CPE sponsors. State boards of accountancy have final authority on the acceptance of individual courses for CPE credit, and complaints regarding registered sponsors must be submitted to the National Registry of CPE sponsors through its website, www.nasbaregistry.org. Okay, we encourage you to ask questions, engage with our speakers, and share your insights throughout today's session. So let's get started. We've got a fantastic panel that I'm really excited about, and it's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. I'll run through them, and then I'll have each of them sort of give us a little bit of overview on their roles and experience. So we're really lucky today to be joined by Dave Hinchman, who's the Director of Information Technology and Cybersecurity at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. Joe Mitchell, who's the Director of Strategic Initiatives and International Programs from the National Academy of Public Administration. Ebby Izdani, the Director of Federal Policy and Government Relations from TechNet, and Patrick Spencer, Distinguished Analyst and Research Fellow from Infotech Research Group. I'd like to welcome all of you and thank you for joining us today and contributing to what is going to be a really important discussion and an informative session. So I'd like to turn to each of you to give a brief intro and overview of your role and experience. So Dave, you're first in my view. I'll turn it to you first, please.
Awesome, Michelle. Thanks. And thanks so much for having me here. I'm excited to be part of this discussion. As Michelle said, my name is Dave Hinchman, Director of IT and Cybersecurity at the U.S. Government Accountability Office. For those not familiar, the Government Accountability Office, or GAO, is an independent legislative branch agency, and we report to Congress on audits, performance audits that we perform at the executive branch. In my particular portfolio, I have a wide range of things like critical infrastructure, cybersecurity, and business systems modernization, but increasingly a lot of my work is focused on what used to be the IT workforce, then became the IT and cyber workforce, and now is really the technology workforce because of AI. And so we have a couple of models that we go out and look at agencies to use and better understand how agencies are managing these technology specialty workforces and what they can do to improve how they manage them.
Thanks, Dave. Joe, I'll throw it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. So I lead our Strategic Initiatives program at the National Academy of Public Administration. We are an independent, nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We're dedicated to make government work effectively and efficiently for all Americans everywhere. And so that's our overall mission. My particular part of the organization does more of our thought leadership. So we focus on kind of the big issues facing government at all levels. So that's one of the reasons I'm really interested in this particular conversation. We also have another part of the organization that works specifically with individual agencies to kind of help them from a consulting and study standpoint. At one point, I led that part of the organization. I've also spent a little bit of time inside government. I was at the General Services Administration in the Office of Government-Wide Policy, helping them set up a new unit there. So really excited to be here with you all.
Thanks, Joe. Abby, I'll throw it over to you.
Thanks, Michelle, and good afternoon, everybody. Ebi Yazdani. I am the Director of Federal Policy at TechNet. We're the national bipartisan network of technology CEOs and senior executives advocating on behalf of the innovation economy at the federal and in each of the 50 states. As part of my portfolio includes issues like data privacy in the private sector, cybersecurity, as well as workforce development and attracting and retaining talent. So looking forward to the conversation.
Awesome. Thanks, Abby. And not last, but certainly not least, Patrick.
I appreciate it. You mentioned that I'm a research fellow at Infotech, and at Infotech, we pride ourselves on actionable research. When I'm not working, which seems to be most of the time, I'm doing a PhD in public policy focused on artificial intelligence. Background is primarily consultancies and SIs. And on a personal note, I have a puppy, and I'm hoping she doesn't video bomb this presentation. So.
Thanks, Patrick. Well, we love puppies, so we're okay with video bombs.
Okay.
But before we dive in, we're going to begin with our first poll. So for the audience, I'd like to ask the question, what's the biggest obstacle to AI and IT workforce training in your agency? Do you see it as lack of funding, resistance to change, limited training resources, or unclear government policies? You should see that pop up. So please go ahead and answer that poll. But let's dive in. Joe, I'd like to start with you. As we begin, I'd like to touch on what the Academy has put out, the grand challenges in public administration. From your perspective, what are some of these challenges and how do they affect the federal workforce?
Good. So I'll start with just a little bit of background about the grand challenges and what they are. So we announced these in November 2019. Hard to believe it's going on 6 years ago. We did a year's worth of research and stakeholder engagement. And so our grand challenges are really the most significant issues that we think face government from a public administration standpoint. They have substantial impacts on individuals, governments, and society. They're grand in the sense that they're not confined to a single level of government or a particular sector or a particular agency. Like no one level of government can solve these things on their own. And they really require considerable innovation and long-term dedication. So we knew from the beginning that we were talking about a decades plus, kind of time horizon. And some of these things are just like evergreen topics that we'll probably always be dealing with in public administration. There are a total of 12 grand challenges. And just to give a little bit of a sense, they're across 4 focus areas. So there are protecting and advancing democracy grand challenges. There's strengthening social and economic development, ensuring environmental sustainability, and managing technological changes. And so those are the kind of 4 areas, and underneath that are a number of grand challenges under each of those. The effects on the workforce, I think, before just going into a couple of the individual grand challenges that I think are of special relevance here to this conversation, is they are grand challenges in public administration because public administration is a critical aspect of addressing each of them. And even when public administrators may not be the highest level decision makers on kind of the big P policy issues or policies that would be used to address them, we think there's no way to address these challenges without administrative agencies. And I think from a workforce standpoint, we recognized from the beginning that public administration needed to operate differently by building agility, strengthening the health inside their agencies, for example. And so that has obvious implications for leaders and managers and rank and file employees. A couple of grand challenges I would highlight here. One is modernize and reinvigorate the public service as a grand challenge. That's one of our democracy grand challenges. And in that, the concern is that we have a long-term, viable, professional, nonpartisan public administration that can deliver the services that the public wants, needs, and deserves, and can advance the public interest. Some of the challenges with that is the need to ensure that we have the appropriate knowledge, skills, and abilities, that we have hiring processes that work so that we can recruit talent in a timely way, talents and skills development so that we can develop the talent we need, and that we can share knowledge across different parts of the workforce. The second one I would highlight is make government AI ready, which is also in the topic here for the day. We want to make sure that agencies can use these tools in an effective, efficient, accountable, and trustworthy way. We all know that AI systems can help us in a lot of ways in terms of our processing. They can help us improve our speed, our efficiency, our effectiveness. They may be able to save us scarce public funds. They can help do a lot of the kind of the legwork, the digging inside data that takes human beings a lot of time to do. So there's a lot of benefits, but there's also some concern about bias, security, transparency, and just our ability to budget for and procure these systems. And so as we all know, kind of, biased data leads to biased results. So we've got to be concerned about that. We also need to think about our cybersecurity more than ever. And also we need transparency. So if you don't have transparency, the public is going to be confused about why decisions were made. And the answer can't just be, well, the bot told me to do it. That's not going to work. And I would just say that since we announced these grand challenges in 2019, I mean, just an enormous amount of progress has been made, toward generative AI that, more closely approximates human intelligence. I was reading an article and Bill Gates was quoted as basically saying that humans aren't going to be needed for most things in 10 years, which can kind of be a little scary to all of us, I think, in the public service space. I tend to be more in, far be it for me to contradict Bill Gates, but I tend to be more in the camp of thinking that these tools are going to augment what human beings already do, that we can't get rid of human beings. The American Society for Public Administration had a conference just last week called Not Robots Yet, Keeping Public Servants in the Public Service. And I just think that there's no replacement for public servants who have the ethos of and the understanding of how to meet human needs. And we have to always keep the public service in mind as we move forward with these kind of grand challenges. So that's a little bit of lay of the land and a couple that I think are especially relevant to our topic today. Happy to answer any questions, Michelle.
Thanks, Joe. No, I think that's really great. And I think sort of the underlying theme there is that long-term collaboration, right? We need to, as you say, make sure these agencies can use these tools in an effective and trustworthy way. And that's what requires, long-term collaboration, getting all parties together to discuss and learn as we move forward. That being said, Dave, I'd like to have you touch on, how can agencies take an innovative approach to workforce development, ensuring collaboration, upskilling, and that clear communication so that, we can successfully integrate AI and cloud technologies?
Yeah. Well, I think that's a really interesting question. I think it builds off of the comments that both of you just shared, because you really need to understand what role it is you want AI to be playing in your organization. You can't do AI for AI's sake. They're incredibly valuable as tools. Those tools are going to become more complex, more advanced. And Joe, to echo your point, the humans will always be there. That's an important part of this, but this will augment our jobs. But I think an important part of that is sitting down before you even talk to a vendor, understanding what it is you want AI to do, because you need to partner with a vendor that's going to be able to deliver on that. Vice versa, that vendor has to make sure that you have a good understanding of what it is AI is going to do for you. And I think you mentioned cloud. I think that's a great example. There are unfortunately far too many examples of people who rushed into cloud without really understanding that cloud does a lot of amazing things, but it is going to change how you operate. And AI is really similar. There are different processes that you're going to have, no matter, depending on how the tools work, no matter how you're trying to put a human in the loop. And so making sure you understand that, finding a good good vendor to partner with, but then also moving forward on that strategy together. And when you hit bumps in the road, which you will, making sure that you both can readjust course and get to where you ultimately want to be with whatever tool or application you're using.
That's great, Joe. I think that's really interesting. The aspect of understanding the role that AI is being brought in for. I think that's the underlying question and focus point that we need to keep in mind. Abby, I'd like to roll over to you for a minute. How can agencies take an effective and collaborative approach to workforce development, balancing the immediate operational needs with the long-term upskilling to build that human capital and to keep, that human workforce and the augmentation of the human workforce in mind?
Michelle, I think that's a great question. And, I want to start by echoing Dave's point and Joe's point here. I think to effectively roll out these technologies and modernize the workforce, you need to start with, what's the mission of the agency? The various, workforce training programs, if they take place in a silo, are not going to be as effective as if they take place organization-wide. And for that matter, across the entire federal workforce. Every agency has a different mission, and so what works for one agency in terms of an upskilling program, may not work exactly the same for another. There's no one-size-fits-all solution in terms of upskilling, but one of the things that I've been, I think it has been given me some optimism here that we'll be able to really make some headway is that there's a broader trend, not only in the public sector, but also in the private sector towards upskilling and recognizing that, yes, from an operational readiness standpoint, there may be a short-term impact for training, but having a, lifelong continuous learning approach is something that pays dividends in the long run. It's also something that, younger workers that are just entering the workforce have said is a top priority. There was a study that found that 74% of millennials and Gen Z workers would leave a job if it didn't offer upskilling opportunities. I think that shows that there's a clear trend in that direction, and it's something that the federal government, the federal workforce is also well equipped to leverage.
Thanks, Abby. I love that. I mean, we talked about this earlier when we got together. It's just that growth mindset and how important it is. You definitely have to have those short-term goals, but as Joe alluded to in the beginning, you have to have that long-term approach and that broader trend towards upskilling that you mentioned. Patrick, let's bring you in here. Maybe you can touch upon and you can talk to us a little bit about what does true AI adaptation look like, and why is upskilling without adaptation ineffective?
Well, I really appreciate the question, and I think it's an important one. So if you're adapting to AI, just building a bit on what Abby was talking about, it's not just about new skills. You need to redesign your organization. You have to rethink how your organization works. It's the roles you have, the workflows, the decision-making, the oversight, it all needs to be sort of rethought. So I like analogies, so I'm going to share one. And what came to mind when you asked the question was around the bullet train in Japan, but using old tracks. So to me, this is analogous to what I see happening. So the train might be advanced, but it won't perform well, or it could even crash without upgrading the whole system. So that's what happens when you add AI without adapting your people and your processes so that they work together. So today, many staff are using AI built-in tools. So you've got cybersecurity systems. It's there. They may not even know it. It could be document processing systems. But I think the important thing to underscore is they don't need to build AI. They just need to sort of understand how it works. They need to know how to manage it, and they need to be able to challenge it when the time is right. So for me, I think it requires more than just training. I agree with Abby. It's a lifelong journey, but it's more than that. And without more, it won't function. And I go back to my analogy. So I think it calls in IT terms a full systems update. You need to redesign the roles. So you need to reflect where humans and AI work together. And I think that's what Dave was alluding to. So staff review and they improve what AI writes instead of starting from scratch. So think of the productivity gains that Joe was talking about, the benefits of AI. You need to embed learning in day-to-day tasks. So what I like about certain tools that we use, there are tips pop up in terms of how to use AI and how to use it better. I find it very helpful. And then you also need to adjust performance expectations. So good judgment, risk awareness, and ethics. So, for example, staff may get credit for spotting mistakes in the AI results. So it's not about using a tool. It's about how effectively you integrate this tool. And I guess applies for a lot of emerging technology. So to me, training in isolation can backfire. You really need the most successful agencies and what I've researched. It's not just a tool, and don't treat it like a tool. Treat it as a signal to sort of modernize the whole system. So if I can offer a key takeaway, adaptation is not a side project. To me, it's about adaptation, and it's the foundation for success. So sustainable AI use really requires adaptation.
Love that. I think there's a number of great points in there from, hey, it's not just about new skills. And it's really about embedding learning in those day-to-day tasks. So I think that's really critical for us to keep in mind and to understand. Thank you, Patrick. Before we jump into the next series of questions, I wanted to do another quick poll. So for those of you in the audience, you'll see it pop up, and the question is, which approach has been more or most effective for upskilling your workforce in emerging technologies? Is it online learning platforms and certifications? Is it hands-on workshops and on-the-job training, mentorship and coaching programs, public and private partnerships? So while the audience dives into that, I'd like to sort of go back to you, Joe. In a rapidly evolving technological landscape, how can federal leaders and the rank and file employees balance immediate operational needs with long-term workforce upskilling, so that we can ensure alignment with policy, ethics, and organizational health? Some of these things have been talked about by each of you as we're moving along here, but would like to get, your thoughts on that, Joe.
That sounds great. Thank you. So I think, first of all, I'm always leery of like false dichotomies between things like near term and long term. I think there's a lot of space in between. As we all know, you have to do what's right in front of you, but and you have to take care of the immediate needs, but those can also help you in terms of your longer term development. So I think as individual employees, we need to be thinking about, hey, how does this help me advance my long-term development plan? It's important, even if it's not in writing, to at least in your head have a sense of like, this is where I want to go with my career, what I need. And I think agencies, at kind of the macro level as an agency itself, but also individual, leaders, managers, supervisors need to be able to support the long-term development of their employees. Would highlight a little bit, you mentioned organizational health, that the Academy completed a report last year on organizational health and performance. I believe that's going to be sent out after the webinar, so I won't go into great detail chapter and verse of it, but there is a report out that we did, and we found a very strong connection between organizational health and performance, and we wanted to create a playbook for people at all levels of an organization that they could use, various strategies that they could use to improve their organizational health and performance. People might ask, well, what is organizational health? It's really the ability to drive your performance results in support of your mission, deliver your programs and services effectively and efficiently, and meet your stakeholder needs on an ongoing basis. And it builds in concepts of resilience, capability, and capacity. And so if you think about successful organizations, and McKinsey has an organizational health index that focuses on this, like successful organizations, you focus on both the what and the how. So the what does the organization do to deliver results? That is like, what are your impacts? And then the how is really internally, like, how do you align? How do you implement? How do you renew yourself? How do you build your teams? How do you do this in a sustainable way? How do you avoid, burning out your best employees, and ensure that you're getting everyone's talents moving forward? So it's really the what and the how are connected. So if you're a healthy organization, the results show that you can deliver significant performance gains, over the long term. And some of the things that healthy organizations do is, if you're in a healthy organization, you understand, your purpose, you have clarity and purpose. You have a work environment where you are encouraged to be innovative and you can contribute in an innovative way. You have autonomy, you have ownership over your work processes. You feel that you can develop and grow. And employees, as an employee, you're given opportunities to advance and you're given recognition. And so in our report, we talked about a number of strategies, kind of playbooks, plays, if you will. First of all, the importance of really having a bold vision. You need to tie that to your mission, and you need to promote that throughout your organization. We need a supportive environment for our employees with psychological safety and inclusive leadership for them to achieve results. We need to communicate. We need a continuous learning culture. And then we need to modernize our HR processes so that we can recruit and retain the talent that we need. And then lastly, we need support at the federal level, certainly from kind of our central management agencies, so the OMBs, the OPMs, and the GSAs of the world. There are a lot of concrete actions that I would say people could take within those broader strategies, and those are outlined in our report. But I will leave it at that. But there are a lot of things that in that vein can be done, I think, both from the near term and the long term to advance performance and organizational health. Happy to answer any
Thanks,
questions.
Joe. Yeah, that's great, Joe. I love that. One of the things that stuck out to me was sort of those successful organizations and what do they do focus on, the what and the how, and then they take those strategies. But again, that sort of recurring theme on support for the employees, that continuous learning, that growth mindset, and then that collaboration and communication that's so important. But going off of that with the what and the how and the strategies, Patrick, I'd like to turn to you. How should success in AI adaptation be measured? Like, what defines a thriving AI ecosystem?
Okay, so I see two parts to that question. They're somewhat related, so I'll deal with them sort of individually. And I think it's a really important question. So the first one is more internal success. So how do you know your agency is actually performing well as it relates to AI? So success, and I'm going to underscore this, it's not just about having AI tools. It's about how effectively people and systems are working together with those tools. So what are signs of successful adaptation? Job descriptions. So update to reflect AI-enabled responsibilities. This is the now and this is the future. Train your staff. So you should have 70 to 80% of your staff trained in AI and digital literacy based, of course, on their role. Increase confidence in the use of AI. And you can use simple things like gather feedback or a survey. And then you want to be able to sort of define processes to catch and resolve AI issues. I think it was maybe Joe, but you could have bias or errors. So you need to, I like quantitative measures, so you'll see a bit of that in here, but you should be able to resolve these in a timely manner. And finally, measurable improvements in service deliveries and user satisfaction. You should be able to show that. So, for example, if you have an agency and it's using AI, how does it reduce? What are response rates? Are they reduced by 50%, 70%? Have you cut your backlog? Have you improved user experience by X% over a period of time? You should be able to do that. So I think these indicators show that AI is embedded within the organization. And I think this will strengthen operations rather than disrupting them. And I think what's really important, I think Joe alluded to it, it also reflects a culture shift. So where AI supports human decision making rather than replacing it, because that, and I think a number of speakers have talked about how important that people are concerned about this, and for good reason. So if I may, the second part of your question, I interpret ecosystems fairly broadly. So what makes AI thrive to me? So it's a strong AI ecosystem, but it goes beyond just government and users. It includes the entire network. I am in academia as well, so it's public and private, it's research, it's infrastructure, it's academia, it's rules. So they support the responsible growth and real world impact. So what does this look for? What should I be looking for? So every day, it's not just pilots. I see a lot of pilots in government, but AI is built into the services that matter. Different teams and sectors work together. It's about coordination. I think you talked about collaboration, Joe, from tech to legal to operations. It's built-in learning and oversight. So systems improve over time through feedback. And then there are checks to catch errors and bias, as I mentioned previously. I think there are shared tools and connected systems. So you need common standards, and that's really important to make it easier to scale and to replicate. And then it's not just public sector, it's public sector and private sector engaging in knowledge exchange and lessons learned to continue to learn. So I think lastly, and I'll underscore this, clear communication and public trust. People need to know where AI is being used and what it's being used for. It's easy to ask questions by the public and to raise concerns, and services stay accessible and easy to use. So I think, and I'm going to tie the two, a healthy ecosystem supports innovation and accountability, and it's helping AI deliver real value at the end of the day. I hope I answered your question.
You did. Thanks, Patrick. I think a couple of things that jumped out at me is that we should consider and think of AI as being embedded in the organization, not disrupting it, not replacing anything or anyone, right? So that going back to that human element. And then thinking about the support, as you mentioned, that it can bring to improve that organization. But through it all, again, not forgetting about that clear communication, because that public trust element really is important. Dave, I'd like to turn to you for a minute. As AI and cloud adoption reshape government government operations, excuse me, how can agencies implement the human in the loop approach to workforce development, balancing the technology with the need for those skilled personnel?
Yeah. Well, I would first say that in the federal government, it's almost as if those are two separate issues, only because I feel AI is very much in the press. We hear a lot about it. There is not a lot of AI in the federal government. There's some small use of relatively confined tools, but the large scale applications that really what you hear about in the sensationalist headlines have not been deployed in the federal government. So we're in baby steps. We're trying to figure this out writ large. You'll find pockets where there's more advanced use, but in fact, if you want, the government keeps a list of the use cases that the government that's published a year on GitHub. So I think this past year, it jumped up to 1,400, which is almost double. So the use is increasing and AI is coming. Don't get me wrong, but the really big applications haven't happened yet. So it comes back to me what we've been talking about consistently: that strategy. If you don't understand what you want AI to do, you're never going to be able to figure out where you want the human in the loop, where you need the upskilling. So the first thing you have to do is create that baseline, and that comes with that strategic vision for what you want to do. I've heard the need for champions in your organization to loudly help people understand why this change is happening. Hugely important for that. Without sort of an evangelist, if you will, to help the organization understand why this change is coming, why it's good for them, you're going to run into resistance. And then I think once you have that sort of strategic vision, then you have to create a workforce baseline. What skills do we have in-house? Maybe we've got someone doing this other related job who has some AI skills, but we don't know about it because we haven't done that inventory. And so once you sort of figure out that, then you can create a gap analysis, take a look at where you do need to fill people and make sure you get the right people with the right skills in the right slots. Whether it's giving folks a chance to upskill themselves through training as part of workforce retention, whether you need to go and hire new folks, but at the same time, understanding things like you talked about: where are we going to put these humans in the loop? Where are they going to fit in? How is that going to impact our business processes? So that you create a feedback loop, and then you're going back in and updating your action plan, figuring out what you need to do so that it's really kind of a living, breathing document. And as the organization evolves with the use of AI, you're also evolving that sort of workforce inventory and making sure that you've still got the right people in the right place with the right skills.
Thanks, Dave. Really like that. And I like the fact that you stress like having champions and communicating why the change is coming. I think that helps with that human element and that healthy atmosphere element that we've been discussing. I'd like to shift a little bit. Abby, I want to turn to you. We're talking about the federal government sort of undergoing transformation, whether, swiftly, slowly, it's coming, but it's not all there. What innovative approaches from state and federal programs can be leveraged to foster like a mindset of learning, collaboration, and curiosity?
I think that's a great question. And we've seen a variety of states take different approaches. And as I touched on at the topic, there are isn't necessarily a one-size-fits-all model that works. I saw the poll results that showed that there were varied responses when it comes to what's the preferred way of accessing training opportunities. There are things like on-the-job training, workshops. There are digital certificates through a course. It was one of the things I thought through when I was in high school, college, and grad school. Was everyone learns differently. And so if we want to end up having a really successful outcome that aligns with any organization's mission, whether it's in the public sector, through the federal workforce, state workforce, or in the private sector, to make it as effective as possible, it needs to align and deliver the best ROI for each of the individuals that are seeking that upskilling and continuous learning opportunity. Back in 2020, California launched the Cal Data program through their Office of Data and Innovation. I think they broadly saw that one of the challenges at the state level was being able to process and analyze the vast amounts of data to determine whether public initiatives were effective. And part of that was, in addition to having enhanced data literacy, it was investing in the state workforce, the public workforce, to be able to analyze the data coming through, be able to make a determination of whether particular public programs were reaching kind of the effective outcome as intended by the legislature. So it's something that I think can easily translate over to the federal level. And there's a longstanding, just from my perspective, of at federal level, of seeing how Congress has looked at this issue. One of the things that gives me a lot of hope and optimism is that this has long been a bipartisan issue. Anytime there's an opportunity to examine different ways of looking at upskilling for the federal workforce, they tend to pass on a broad bipartisan basis, if not unanimously. And this is not just a recent thing. This goes back to the 50s with the Government Employee Training Act of 1958, where Congress authorized agencies to craft these kind of training programs. The pace is now slightly different with the advent of a lot of new technologies that could augment worker productivity, but the conclusion's the same. I think there are a lot of opportunities to look at what states have done, tailor it, not necessarily copy it, because it may not work as effectively as it did in a particular jurisdiction.
Thanks, Abby. I like that. I think it is important for us to keep in mind that the one size, doesn't fit all models, right? And everyone does learn differently. So in order to make things effective as possible, you need to learn from others. And it goes back to that growth mindset. And I do love the fact that this is generally a bipartisan issue. So it gives those multiple perspectives that I think are really important to success. I'm going to pause and do our last poll of the day. So the question is, what skill set will be most critical for federal employees in an AI-driven future? Is it data literacy and AI comprehension, cybersecurity and risk management, cloud computing and automation, or strategic decision-making and adaptability? So from there, Abby, I'd like to go back to you because one of the things that I think a lot of our audience members are thinking about today are like, what key skills should federal employees develop today to stay relevant in the evolving IT landscape? And how can lessons from that state-led initiatives perspective inform the federal workforce strategies?
I think that's a great question, and I apologize for coming off mute. I was looking at the results of the poll. I think several. There have been several trends that we've seen, at least just across the workforce. In the public sector and private sector, there's a shift away, and I think your question, is spot on here. There's been a shift away from kind of a degree-based or simply credential-based approach to determining whether the skills gap has been addressed, and looking towards soft skills that augment somebody's ability to hit the ground running for a particular task. Because the challenges that we all face in any organization are going to evolve, and they're evolving rapidly. Just 3 or 4 years ago, we had a study entitled "Closing the Skills Gap," where we talked about workforce shortages all across the country by failing to invest in STEM education. We didn't mention AI. And then a year later, there's now been this growing, recognition that, AI skills are in high demand, and we see it in a lot of these fields. They're growing much faster than the labor force is growing. They're growing at a much faster rate. So I think it's a combination of, technical skills, things like data literacy, which, going back to, the just statistics of being able to really parse through the data that comes through, and the federal government and state governments are looking at a wide variety of data and being able to draw the right conclusions. And one of the things that AI can augment, and going back to Patrick's point, is AI has the ability to really synthesize data, but to best utilize that synthesis, it's helpful to understand how AI is going about doing that. That enables agencies to determine whether a particular program is most effective or not. This kind of approach to kind of more technical skills in terms of, data literacy, cloud architecture, AI readiness is also something that, just as recently as last year has been looked at as a preferred hiring qualification at the federal level. Last Congress, I think Senator Sinema introduced legislation called the Chance to Compete Act that directed federal hiring agencies to look at technical certifications. We've seen it in a lot of proposals that Congress has debated last Congress and will likely debate again on short-term workforce training programs, expanding those opportunities for the workforce all across the country. So this is going to be something that's going to really be top of mind for the foreseeable future. And I think, and again, like going back to the point I made at the top, but really kind of an all of the above approach to ensure that each person in the workforce is able to reach their maximum potential is going to be the most effective approach.
Thanks, Abby. I love that last part. That's certainly important to keep in mind. Dave, what would you say are the most effective, or if there's a most effective success story in workforce modernization that you can talk to us about? And how can agencies apply those lessons to recruit, manage, and train employees for an AI-driven future?
And now you're getting at stuff that's very near and dear to my heart. We at GAO, we've spent a lot of time thinking about this. We've polled industry best practices. We've polled federal agencies, and the best thing that anyone can do is to create a repeatable process for how you manage your people. That's important. Too often it's ad hoc. As I mentioned, you don't have a baseline. You're trying to figure out who needs to be where, what do you need, what do you not have? And I think it all starts with putting a repeatable framework in place. And luckily, there are a lot of great tools out there. OPM has a kind of 5-step process for managing your workforce that we've used to look at cybersecurity workforces. And that's like, you set a strategic direction, you conduct workforce analysis, you develop a workforce action plan, you manage against that plan, you come back, revise it. We talked about that. But we've also put together a framework with our partners in our strategic issues team within GAO that's essentially a 15 practice framework for managing your IT workforce. And this is basically focuses more on recruitment and retention, which I think dovetails nicely with the OPM model, because it addresses things like, what do you do to get the right people? How do you keep them? What, continuing education do you provide? How do you keep their morale up? So that you're really doing a cradle to grave. And I think the more agencies can look at these repeatable models, start putting elements of those models into place, because every agency is going to be in a different place of maturity in regard to these models. But if you really don't have any basic comprehension of what your workforce looks like, start with those basic building blocks and build from there. And then as you move along, you can spend time and energy working on the more mature steps. But I think that is a hugely and relatively straightforward approach that folks can use to make sure that especially when you have something like AI, which is going to be a much smaller talented pool, it's going to be competitive to get the right people, so that you have a good process in place for getting the best talent available into the needs where you have them within your organization. No, you're muted, Michelle.
Thanks, Dave. I love that, and I love how excited you got by that. The passion is impressive, and something that we can all catch.
Yeah.
What really stood out to me is sort of creating that repeatable process, because that's what we've been talking about. Like, this isn't a one and done. This is an evolution, and it goes back to that growth mindset while, supporting the workforce to attain the skills necessary for that evolution. But were you going to add something?
Yeah, and the best part about all this is all publicly available.
Mm.
OPM makes their framework available. You can find reports that have our framework in it. I think we're sending something out, and we can include a link to see how we did it at the State Department, for instance. So this is all out there with, I think, a good explanation of how we view those frameworks and how they're applicable to your organization.
And again, I love that, because I think that goes back to, again, that public trust element too. So, having it all out there so everyone can learn, but everyone can be transparent to understand, what truly is going on. Patrick, I'd like to shift to you for a moment. What strategies enable organizations to successfully adapt to AI-driven change? What can you tell us about that?
Well, first I'll try to match Dave's energy, so I'll do my best. Haven't had my afternoon coffee yet, but I hope I don't sound like a broken record. But adapting to AI is more than just rolling out tools. So it's aligning people, it's aligning process, it's aligning policies. The whole system needs to work together. And I told you before, I like analogies. I'm going to make an analogy to an orchestra. You just don't hand out instruments. You need to tune them. You need to assign roles. You need to coordinate with everybody. So AI is no different. And I think Joe started off with, it's about coordination. So I think that's really important. So 5 levers, if I may, in terms of what's an AI ready organization. And we've said this, and what's nice is we're starting to repeat ourselves a bit, but decide when AI should help, decide when the human should sort of lead, and decide when the two should work together. So this is going to require updating roles and training, and obviously accountabilities as well. So I also think there needs to be, and we talked about lifelong learning, continuous learning. There needs to be tiered AI and digital learning. They both need to be. It's not just about AI. It's do them at the same time. So offer baseline AI training to all staff, but then provide deeper training depending upon those in specialized roles. So if my job is to review an algorithm or make ethical risk decisions, I need specific training. So I need to do that. And then don't forget, and something else I think Joe talked about, that there's this cross-functional nature of governance. It's not about IT, it's not about HR, it's not about ethics. Involve everyone, including your frontline staff. So you want to make everybody responsible and involved in the decision-making process. So this keeps everything transparent, safe, and in line with public sector values. One thing we do, I think really well at Infotech is communities of practice. So support, it's not just about formal learning, it's about informal learning groups. What's in the news? Where can you share real life examples? Where can I ask questions or raise concerns, especially as it relates to kind of fairness and also to explainability? And I think Dave sort of highlighted this. Leaders need to include AI in their strategic goals and actively support it. So walk the talk. And if you see your leaders doing it, and somebody talked about sort of psychological safety, it was you, Joe, you need to sort of have that. And I think it starts with leadership. So together, to me, these strategies help shift the organization from a one-off pilot mindset to more of a mission and aligned transformation as it relates to AI. I like key takeaways. So for me, adaptation, and that's sort of the operative word here. It's not a checklist. It's an ongoing collaboration between technology and mission at the end of the day.
Really like that. And I love the orchestra analogy. I think that's fantastic. And I think, again, it's that constant theme that we keep coming back to. And there's a few takeaways, one of them being that collaborative effort. I love the idea of like working groups so that you can bring people together to see who's learning what. And then from there, you can create strategies and approaches to moving forward in an intelligent way and in a safe way. Joe, I'd like to turn to you for a minute. What innovative approaches can agencies take to foster a healthy culture and drive high performance while also increasing the public's trust in government, which we've been talking about?
Great, thank you so much. So you mentioned public trust, so maybe that's the end of your question, but maybe I'll start there. And the bad news is that in survey after survey, most American respondents for decades have been reporting low and declining levels of trust in government. The American people feel that they don't get the government that they deserve, that they need. They think that it's ineffective, it's inefficient. And they're frustrated. And so what we found, and if you look at the survey data, is that there's less trust in the federal government. There's more trust at the state and local level, but all levels of government have a trust deficit. Now, there is some good news, actually, believe it or not. If you look at the data, if you really look beyond just like asking people, do you trust government or not? If you ask people about their experiences with specific federal agencies or specific services, those are actually higher. And in fact, there was a survey done in 2024 that showed citizen satisfaction with federal services overall reached a 7-year high last year. So there are some positives there. And if you look at individual agencies and you say, do you trust this agency? Like the National Park Service is almost 80%. The Postal Service is over 70%. NASA is nearly 70%. So those are high scores, but it does. And so the question is, can we move the needle? Can we continue to improve at kind of the agency level and the service level? And will that transfer into people having trust in government overall? And so I think that there are some things that we can do in that regard. First of all, I think as public servants, certainly career people, we need to understand our roles and responsibilities. We need to work, to perform well and to be responsive and demonstrate that we're upholding our public oath. We have to have a positive mindset. We need to demonstrate results that people care about, that like people can see, like in my backyard, government is doing some positive things, and we need to do that. We also need to work to make organizations healthier. As I talked about, we've got strategies, we've got processes for really thinking through that, what and how we do this so that we can demonstrate results and while having a very strong internal culture. We also, the Academy has established an Agile Government Center, and it's not from a technical standpoint, but it's taking the kind of principles and practices of Agile from a software development, the focus on the customer, putting them at the center, and networks and all of those kind of aspects, like not being as hierarchical. Like we've been trying to figure out how do you run agencies themselves like that. And so I think that if we use those agile principles and practices, we can make government work a lot better for people. And then lastly, I would say we also need to strengthen our communications about government. There was, I think it was Luther Gulick back in the 80 years ago or whatever, said that public administrators have a passion for anonymity, which it does certainly describe, I think, a lot of us. And so I oftentimes feel like that the Office of Communications or Public Affairs and agencies are like designed to keep the agency out of the news, which is understandable given our sensibilities, but it's like it's really important to communicate about good government. And the first thing around that is you have to be demonstrating, you have to be truthful. You got to be able to say, we are actually doing positive things. So get that out there in channels that people can use in new and innovative ways, and make sure that you do that. But I think that there really are opportunities through all of those mechanisms to try to improve both government performance and also the public's trust in government. It's a really important assignment.
Thanks, Joe. I totally agree with you there, and appreciate all that insight. So we have a number of questions from the audience. If you guys don't mind, I'm going to try to pick one or two and just see, what any of you may have to add to them. Not to put you on the spot, but just see. Let's go through one or two of them. One that popped out to me, and you guys can tell me, just unmute and chime in if you have something that you'd like to address with it. Someone had asked, while AI requires technical skills, how might government employees go about adding the dimensions of morality and ethics and make it transparent? We've talked about transparency and we've talked about, some of these elements, but do you have anything to add on the fact around that sort of health, the morality, the ethics, and the transparency?
Michelle, I'll jump in. When the generative AI took off a couple of years ago, there was a conversation, about the need for particularly new legislative frameworks. And what I thought was interesting was, and this was maybe 2022, 2023, several agencies going through the Justice Department, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, recognized that existing statutes, existing frameworks that address things like mitigating bias would also apply to the deployment of artificial intelligence. And then on the I think the point is well taken when it comes to the issue of morality or ethics when it comes to AI. A lot of the frameworks that have kind of been longstanding, I think, would also work in that context. And one issue that I think gets a lot of folks' attention, outside of DC and everyday Americans, is the issue of privacy and data privacy. But we've had a long tradition in the U.S. and of the concept of fair information privacy principles or fair information protection principles, where those same points about consent and transparency are things that are broadly in line with the vast majority of consumers, and definitely with the their expectations for how their data should be used and handled. Those provide a very easy way, I think, to apply to any type of deployment of AI. But the federal government, states are continuing to examine kind of the scope of this, and so it remains to be seen exactly what type of framework is crafted. But we have stuff that we can work off of, and I'm optimistic they can work as AI gets deployed further.
That's great, Abby. Thank you. I want to turn back for 1 second. We've touched on government, we've touched on the federal level, as well as what we can learn from the state and local level. We've talked about how private sector is involved here too. But maybe Joe, if you can touch on, I know we only have a few minutes left, but what are your thoughts in regards to how can public-private partnerships support the workforce upskilling within the federal sector?
Yeah, so I can put a plug in for some work that we've been doing at my organization, the National Academy of Public Administration, as part of our Agile Government Center, which I mentioned briefly earlier. So we've been working with the Selective Service System, and we've trained 2 cohorts of their employees on key practices and principles of Agile government. We have a leading Agile transformation course. It's been accredited by IC Agile, which is the international accrediting body for this subject matter. And ultimately, we have multiple modules, and each cohort completes an Agile engagement project. So that ensures that you're not only learning as an employee, but that the agency receives tangible results from the training. So I think that that's something that just doing some training for with people who have been like ourselves. We've got people that have been inside government, that have worked for government for years and worked around government, and some innovative techniques there. We've also done similar work with the Federal Executive Institute and with the White House Leadership Development Program. So I think that's one thing. If I can just note some offerings that we have. I think more broadly, I think people need to really think about talent exchanges across sectors and levels of government. They can be great development tools. People have not traditionally thought about those. They could be temporary. I know when I went to the GSA, I was brought in on an Intergovernmental Personnel Act appointment. So there are temporary opportunities. There are also longer term opportunities where people go to work for another level of government or sector, and maybe they bring that back. And then lastly, I would say, ideally, I would hope that AI would free people up to focus on higher value work. So let AI take care of a lot of the processing types of activities that are really burdensome to human beings, and then use that to free up your time so that you as people can do the higher value. But those are just some thoughts I had on the public-private partnerships and upskilling in general.
Fantastic. And I appreciate that, Joe. I really like the talent exchange. We've talked about sort of short-term immediate needs versus the long-term, evolution of upskilling in the workforce and what is needed from a tech perspective. And I think that ties in nicely with all of that. We have 2 minutes left. So before I wrap things up, if each of you had to point to one key takeaway, it's kind of tough because there's been a lot, but if you could point to one key takeaway that you'd like our audience to remember from our conversation today, what would it be? And anyone can chime in.
I can start. I would say that I think everybody agrees, like, don't do AI for AI's sake. There needs to be a broader strategy here. And as I've joked with you all, I felt like when I looked at this panel, I'm like, these people are like super tech. I'm not. I'm like a humanities student taking a STEM class. But it's really great that I think that despite our diverse backgrounds, I think everybody agrees on that.
Yeah.
That would be a key takeaway for me.
Use a framework to manage your staff. Make sure you got the right people in the right places when you need them the most.
I'm going to go back to my analogies. So don't have the bullet train and old tracks. Don't do that. And I'll also underscore and I'll mix my analogies with the orchestra. It's one thing to replace it, but do it well, tune it properly, and coordinate.
I think there's also a broad agreement, and this has been a wonderful conversation on the need to shorten the distance between identifying a skills gap in the federal workforce and then closing that and filling that skills gap. And there are a lot of different solutions and examples that we can work from, and sky's the limit there.
Love that. Thank you all. I can't believe we're actually at the end of the hour. So I'd like to thank each of our panelists, as well as everyone in the audience for joining us. It's been a great conversation with a lot of great discussion, a lot of great themes, a number of takeaways on the challenges, the best practices, the importance of, the future outlook. It is not a one and done. It's a long-term evolution. Before we say goodbye, I have two housekeeping items. Alyssa just put up a CPE poll. So for anyone who has completed each poll, would like a CPE sent to them, please fill out that poll that's popping up now with a yes or a no. And for all of our friends or audience members and panelists, if you're in DC, please join us for our happy hour on April 24th. We're opening our new office. We're excited to show it off to all of our friends. Alyssa put a link into the chat for anyone who would like to register and join us. And overall, just thank you, everyone. And I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Cheers.
Take care.